Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican about the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez. Today, we are returning to the topic of forests and fires. Earlier, we talked to Santa Fe Fire Chief Brian Moya about prevention techniques. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Adam Atchley, a hydrologist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, where he and other scientists study wildfire and rainfall to better understand critical ecosystems. Welcome, Dr. Atchley.
Great to be here.
So tell us what your team is learning about the conditions in our forests.
Well, we're learning all kinds of things. I mean, some of the stuff we're working on right now is how to better map and observe and measure the forest structure. And so we're starting to employ machine learning AI-derived models to model the canopy height from satellite data. We're using a lot of LiDAR to measure with collaborators.
Okay, what's LiDAR?
LiDAR. LiDAR is a tool that you use. It basically shoots a laser from whatever device you have. A lot of times you fly it in an airplane.
Like radar with a laser, kind of?
Yeah. And that laser bounces back, and that distance, the distance it travels, is measured by the how long it takes for that laser to return. And so if you shoot out a bunch of lasers, you get a bunch of returns, and you get to see a 3D structure of whatever it is you're looking at. In the past 10, 15 years, LiDAR is providing an amazing amount of measurements for forest observation. Archaeology is being applied all over. It's a great tool.
So it's telling you basically what's out there and what could burn.
Yeah, I mean, it's telling you, you can get a picture of a tree. It's 3D canopy, where the branches are, where the needles and the leaves are. And so it's telling you where the trees are, where the shrubs are, to some degree, how much surface fuel is on there if you have down logs. And it depends on how high of a resolution or how many lasers you shoot and where you shoot them from to get the measurements that you want.
And one of the things with fire is that for years, the Forest Service, as we all know, had a policy that fire was bad, smoky, wants you not, to have forest fires. And as a result, we've gotten a little overgrown or a lot overgrown. Is that correct? Or are our forests not the way they would be if natural fire had happened?
Yeah, so especially in the West, or actually really what people don't realize is that much of the terrestrial ecosystems out there are shaped by fire in some way. And in fact, depending on how you define it, about half of the world's terrestrial ecosystems are what you would call fire-dependent ecosystems. And so that means that fire is a defining characteristic of that ecosystem. So if you take fire out of that ecosystem, it's like taking the rain out of the rainforest.
So if you don't have fire, then whatever's supposed to happen, even if at the moment, the little bunnies are burning up or whatever, if you don't have fire, then what you get in 20, 30, 50 years isn't really that ecosystem anymore. Precisely.
Yep. And that's especially true here for New Mexico, where we have a lot of fire-dependent ecosystems. And we have what I call fire-frequent, low-severity type ecosystems. And that's like that beautiful, picturesque ponderosa pine, where the trees there are especially evolved for low-intensity fire that comes through every 6 to 12 years. And that shapes a certain types of forest structure, that shapes the ecosystem in certain ways. It's usually a lower density forest, so it's not really thick. There's not a lot of fuels there. There's a lot of grasses, finer fuels or lighter fuels along the forest floor. And if you think about a ponderosa pine, it has a certain canopy shape to it, where you have that nice big bowl of the tree or the trunk, and then higher off the ground you start to see these needles, and they're fairly thin, low density. They're longer than a lot of other types of pine needles, and so I would think that there's a lot of structure there that both is shaped by fire, but also it's evolved from the fire, repeated fire conditions, and it shapes the fire behavior itself. So that type of ecosystem, you would get a different type of fire than you would if you took the fire out, let the ecosystem grow for 30, 40, and in some places in the West, we've had fire-suppressed forests for over 100 years, and so now they're really thick, they're really loaded, and that's a totally different fire to come through that ecosystem.
And when those burn, that everything kind of goes crazy. Yep. In terms of the destruction and what's left, and And how do you, because we have houses near the forest, we have people near the forest, how do you go back to the low intensity fire that nature let happen with humans interfering in everything?
That is the real challenge, because now you have a system that is ready to burn. There's a paper that recently came out. I'm not an author on it, but it's stating that even with the increase in wildfires that we're seeing today, the Western United States is still what they call a fire deficit, meaning that it just hasn't had enough fire on the landscape that it's used to. And so, like the rainforest, if you took rain out of that
So we're in a
rainforest,
fire drought.
We're in a fire drought. And if we were in a rainforest and we were in a rainforest drought, the plants would thirst that water. The landscape and the forest is really wanting, or I don't know if wanting's the right term, but it's primed to burn because it's super loaded with fuels and it's going to behave differently. Reintroducing fire to that landscape becomes really difficult. But it's a catch-22, because if you don't do that, then the fires that will happen because of nature or
human error,
down power lines, you name it, they're going to burn way more intense. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
So it's, it is a hard and tricky question to answer. We definitely recognize the landscape needs fire. We're starting to learn and study the tools it takes to do that. But again, not as easy as simply, well, let's just feed the beast and have a fire today, because obviously
it could be windy. You might not have enough crew to watch it, and then you go away and it starts up again. I mean, fires are very tricky, as we all know in New Mexico. How does prescribed burn and that whole technique work when it comes to managing our forests?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to apply prescribed fire, and there's a lot of different ways to, a lot of different end goals that you want to have for a prescribed fire. So each ecosystem has a different type of fire that it's evolved for and needs. So there's a whole myriad of ways you might want to do that. Some of the things that we're working on now is we're modeling interacting fire lines where you can ignite a fire along a boundary, and then you might ignite another fire line, an ignition point, 20 yards, 100 yards away. And then our models are modeling how those fire lines interact with each other. And what you can do there is you can temper the fire behavior in different ways. But doing that is tricky. It's not easy.
Right.
A lot of fire bosses just intuitively know how to do it because they've been doing it for so long. But what we're trying to do is model, those interacting fire lines so that we can provide more information precisely. Like today, you might want to spread your fire lines out a little bit more. You might want to put more fire in the landscape over here. You might want them closer together. And it all depends on what your end goals are and what you need to consider. One of the things you needed to consider is the smoke that you put out. And so that's another way to influence the type of smoke, where that plume goes, how high it goes, whether it goes one direction or another, or if you can keep it locally at the site.
So it's one of those things that we think of fire as this force of nature, which it is, of course, but it also can be a scientific process and be directed in a way that's more helpful and perhaps less potentially harmful.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Right. And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
Are you dreaming of a home of your own in Santa Fe but feel like it may never happen? HomeWise is here to help. We are a local nonprofit that has helped close to 7,000 New Mexicans from all income levels and backgrounds become homeowners. HomeWise has everything you need to succeed in home ownership, including free coaching and classes, real estate services, affordable fixed-rate mortgages with low down payments, and down payment assistance to qualified borrowers who meet income restrictions and credit qualifications. We'll be with you every step of the way. Get started today on your path to owning a home. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking about fire and our forests and how science can teach us about what fire will do and how to conduct fires in a way that's more beneficial. So talk about the computer models that you guys are doing up at the lab, the science of it.
So Los Alamos has a long history of using computer models. And in fact, in some ways, we don't have the market cornered, but we have a very powerful, what we call high performance computing, which is a lot of processors. They're basically really
That's
big
why you need
computers.
so much energy.
Yeah, exactly. But it's with these computers that we're able to run some of our models. And so one of the models that we use, it's called FireTech. It is run on high performance computing because what it does is it solves the complicated physics, the atmospheric dynamics. It's solving physics-based equations to get at how does wind flow through the canopy and the atmosphere. How does it interact with different fuel structures? And then as you burn, you get a whole nother complicated dynamic going on. You get this buoyant plume where if you know how when you heat something up or you heat the air up, that air rises, becomes less dense, and that starts to suck in winds from the other outside. And in fact, we see this when we light fires. If we, I was just on a prescribed fire last year in Georgia, and they lit this prescribed fire unit off, and all of a sudden the wind started picking up around and being sucked in. And and you could use that to your advantage. And this is why those interacting fire lines that I was talking about earlier matter so much, where if you have two fire lines together, they both create this buoyant plume and they start to interact. The models that we have at Los Alamos, particularly FireTech, are some of the only models out there that can capture that dynamic going on. And so this is why we use those models, and we need those big computers to run those models that capture that dynamic. I will say that we're working on ways to represent that with faster running models. We're using different equations or different types of speed ups. We're starting to think about how might we use machine learning or AI to get
There's going to be an app for that someday?
Someday. I mean, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
One of the we have FireTech, which uses high performance computing, solves the hard equations, and then we have another model that is faster run called QuickFire. And the whole idea is how do we get these types of tools into practitioners' hands so that they can run the model and see how their unit, is going to perform, that they're planning in the next week or something like that.
And it can help you even, let's say, with a natural fire, because, whether you keep prescribed burns or someone bans them completely because they're afraid of them or whatever, you're going to have a lightning strike in the summer. You're going to have a down power line or some idiot that doesn't put out their campfire. So things are going to happen and there's going to be a fire. Can you take those models once it starts and look at where it might go and what might happen?
So the research code, I would say, doing these experiments helps you inform what could happen. Now, a research code that runs on high performance computing, they're not going to be ready for real-time employment or deployment. So if you see them, if you're like, oh, today there was a lightning strike, we want to know what the fire is going to do, that boat's already sailed and it'll be hard to employ those models that day. But you can do things like, if we had a fire in this environment, what might it look like in the future, and start to play what-if scenarios. And that's something that these models are very important with doing. And so with that, you can start to say, well, what type of fuel reduction do we need to make the fire a bit more manageable? One of the questions that I'm specifically interested in is what type of forest structures become more resilient to wildfire and more extreme conditions. So if you think about, again, those frequent fire, low intensity forests like the ponderosa pine, they kind of have this signature structure where it's a low density forest. Are those fires a lot easier to maintain? Are the spread rates slower or faster? Or are they just less intense? And so those are the types of questions we can play. And then you can start to identify, well, what type of forests are going to be really resilient to increasing propensity or occurrence of fire. And that gives land managers an idea of how maybe they want to shape the forest. Or if you see forests of different structures, maybe this forest is just naturally more dense, or for whatever reason, we need to keep an eye on that. We need to be prepared for that. And these types of models help you get at and prepare for, identify points of danger or
and where it might. Because as I remember covering forest fires back in the day, the crown fires were like bad things to happen, but a fire that went along the bottom. slowly wasn't such a bad thing in terms of, what damage it might do and how it might spread or something.
Yeah, that's totally correct. So again, that, leaning back on our New Mexican ponderosa pine forest, they tend to have surface fires, which burn along the surface. They don't get into the crown as easily. There's less ladder fuel because fire has kept that ladder fuel from growing in those places. And that fire, it actually might spread faster, but it's a lower intensity fire. And so it's much easier to stop. A smaller fire line can stop it. It won't jump as far. But a more dense forest, you can get up into that crown and then burn that crown and it'll spread. Now, I should say that some ecosystems prefer a crown fire.
Okay.
So there are ecosystems out there that like that the plants are adapted to a crown replacing fire. Lodgepole pine ecosystem is a great example where they have serotinous pine cones, and their whole strategy is they're going to burn everything down and regrow.
Wow. So what we try to preserve as humans isn't necessarily what nature has developed in terms of how it creates its ecosystems and then maintains them.
Yeah, I mean, that well said. Like it's, there's our idea, there's nature's idea, and nature's responding to the environmental conditions around it. There's a reason why forests of one area have a certain shape, structure, function, species composition, and forests of another don't look like that. They look like something else. Fire is often a controlling factor in that shaping. It could be on one hand a crown fire. It can be on another hand a low creeping fire. Another example is aspens. Aspens are very indicative of fire. They love fire disturbance because...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they are rhizomatous. They sprout up. So any type of disturbance will come along, kill the tops, and then you'll get aspens coming up. And that is in the fire scars that we're seeing in New Mexico. We see some aspens coming back stronger than they were before the fire because you've cleared out that overstory, and now you're starting to get in a really young aspen stand.
Oh, and then they make that lovely little noise that they make.
Yeah.
I love aspens. All right, on that, we'll take a quick break and be back with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Dr. Atchley about forests and fire and how science can teach us. I want to go back to your title because you're a hydrologist.
Yeah.
Now, why is there a hydrologist in the forests instead of, let's say, running rivers or streams? Obviously, it has to do with rainfall, I assume, but talk about that connection. I just thought that was interesting.
There's a lot of connections there. In all honesty, I love running rivers and streams. I kayak, I'm a rafter, I love the rivers. The watersheds typically are in the forest. The headwaters are.
That's right. Yep.
If you want to look what your stream and river is doing, turn around and see what's going on upslope. Because upslope is where the rain meets the dirt, so to speak. In the western United States, but all over the world. If you think about hydrology and water, what we like to think about it is what we call the hydrologic budget. And it's just like a bank account. You got stuff coming in and you got stuff going out. Instead of money, it's water. And so in a watershed, you have rain and snow coming in and going out. You have stream flow, groundwater recharge. Groundwater recharge doesn't really go out. It's like a nice bank account. And you have what we call evapotranspiration. And what evapotranspiration is it's really two things. It's evaporation, just the soil surface drying off, and it's transpiration. And that's what the plants are using.
Okay.
So water moving from the soil, and it's rain, back into the plants and out through the leaves. This is why we water our garden. you get transpiration. And through most of the world, and especially the West, evapotranspiration is the biggest knob on the hydrologic budget. So for all the rain and snow that falls on a watershed, anywhere from 80 to 90% of that leaves as evapotranspiration in the western United States. So anytime you do something that changes evapotranspiration, that's a big knob on the hydrologic budget. And what changes vegetation? Well, fire does it. And it does it regularly, it does it severely, it does it mildly, it does it in all types of different ways. The question and interest that I have as a hydrologist is, well, what types of hydrologic budget changes are we going to get from an extreme fire versus a moderate mild fire versus a prescribed fire? What does the forest structure that determines where the trees are on the landscape and how many trees are there on the landscape? How does that change that big old knob on the hydrologic budget? So that's why I'm interested in, that's really what got me interested into wildland fire science. And of course I stayed because it's really fascinating stuff. I mean, it's just a dynamic thing that's going on across the landscape.
And it's happening in real time.
Yeah. And, what fire is kind of fun.
Yeah. No.
I mean, we all like to sit and watch the fireplace, right?
Yes. And seeing its power, I think, is one of those things that when you grow up, I grew up in Las Vegas, so the forest fire there really impacted, places that I went to as a child, and my parents' home in Mora County was right in the path of the one that went up the canyon that day. And going back there, it hasn't begun any recovery at this point. It's just a big mess. But, they're planting and doing things, but it's a ways away from chutes. It just makes you realize, how helpless in a way we are. And it seems like your science could help us get better prepared.
I would hope so. That is the ultimate goal, is to provide science for the community and the world that allows for better preparedness, if you understand the processes, you now have a place to start on what to do and what to expect. One thing I wanted to mention about hydrology and wildland fire science is that people don't realize that the dangers of the wildfire aren't over when the flames stop. And so debris flows, landslides, and flash floods actually, in some cases, killed more people than the fire itself. And that's often the case. And that's all a change in, it's not just hydrology, but it's change in what the soil's doing and its response, and how, when you have a rain event, how the soil is able to soak up, or what we call infiltrate the water into the ground. So you can get runoff or infiltration, and those processes are very different.
Is the soil different after a fire?
It is. It changes quite a bit, and it changes it's again a dynamic process. You get all kinds of things going on. You may have heard of something called hydrophobicity.
No, I have not. to be honest, yes, hydrophobicity.
You hear it every now and then. You hear it. Hydrophobic soils.
They don't like water?
They don't.
Oh, like yay, Latin.
Essentially, you have certain oils that burn in the fire, and it changes the ability of water to sit on the surface or on soil particles. And it's a lot like waxing your car. So when you wax your car, the water beads up because it changes how that water sits on there. And when it does that, after you wax your car, the water runs off your car and it looks great.
And you look pretty. Yeah, it's the opposite of permeable.
It's the opposite of permeable. When you do that on the ground, instead of the water infiltrating and becoming groundwater and stream, beautiful.
All the beautiful things you need.
It runs off and it carries a whole bunch of dirt with it, and that's initiates debris flows, sediment in the rivers. Those processes are they don't last that long, but there's other processes. There's physical crust forming. There's infiltration rates changing. So infiltration is the ability of the soil to soak up that water, to infiltrate in. And all those processes are changing over time following a fire, creating higher instances of erosion, landslides, debris flow.
And that ruins your soil.
It could be
and in
really dangerous.
Right now they're boiling water because something has happened at the water plant, probably partly because of the sediments, et cetera, and they don't have drinking water in the whole town at this point because it was, a stream-fed water system, which at one time was like the best water you could get.
Yeah, I mean, you have that influx of sediment. All that sediment's carrying stuff.
That's right. And whatever you fight the fire with has lots of chemicals, which probably aren't necessarily what you want to drink. So there's a lot of damage during the fire, even if it's a necessary thing for nature. And then because of how we fight it and just all the things that happen naturally, there's going to be a lot of after effects that people have to watch.
Right. And it doesn't have to be damaging. Mm-hmm. It typically is when it gets out of control and it doesn't fit within what we would like and want. But there's, the phrase good fire on the landscape. And,
right.
And that is a totally different scenario where you could have fire on the landscape that doesn't affect your water resources, or if it does, how much does it? Another thing to think about, and this isn't, this is a sort of my own hypothesis, and it's a hard nut to crack in science. There's a lot of literature going different ways. But if you're shaping the forest in a certain way and you're decreasing transpiration, but you're keeping some plants in the landscape, you're not affecting infiltration too much, maybe you can get a bump in the amount of water that comes off of the landscape following a fire that is not sediment-laden. That's something that we call in hydrology, it feeds groundwater and base flow. Base flow is the amount of, if you think of a spring,
okay,
and it's running even when it's not raining, that's usually goes into what we call base flow. It's sort of the base line, stream discharge that comes out.
It's what you're going to have basically all the time.
Yeah. And that's usually nice, crystal clear water. We like that. If you reduce transpiration or you optimize it in a way, that base flow can go up. And we've seen this in literature where we're seeing following fire, base flow can go up. We see big floods going up too, which are problematic. But what type of flow regime you get, is likely dependent upon the type of fire behavior that you saw from the initial disturbance.
Okay. So like you said, there's repercussions long after. And I was, for some reason, it made me think, when you said baseball, that made me think of snowpack. If you're in a denuded atmosphere after a big fire and your snow starts to melt, you're going to have runoff again. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of different ways for water to change the ecosystem of the forest after a fire.
Yep. And there's still a lot of questions on how forest structure is going to affect the snowpack. That question hasn't been answered yet. We don't know for a different landscape how gaps in the forest or no forest versus forest cover is going to change the snowpack. And it is likely different here in New Mexico than it is in Montana or Colorado, because there's different environmental conditions that affect that. So snowpack, rainfall coming in. It's a very complicated, well, I don't know if it's complicated, but it's
complex.
It's complex, and it's likely unique to the environmental conditions that you see at that point. So the changes in the forest are just one other condition layered on top of where you are on the mountain, where your mountain is with relation to the North Pole and the South in the equator. All these different energy fluxes coming in are determining that.
And on that note, this has been another Conversations Different, and we end wondering, why does science have to be so complicated? I mean, there's just so much stuff that you have to figure out.
Does it have to be complicated? I don't know that it has to be complicated.
It is. It just is. I mean,
there's a lot of stuff going on, but I think when you break it down, in my opinion, we're always looking to what's the simple equation, what's the driving, what's the drive behind it, what's the simple process. And not, it is complicated, but it's also sometimes it's just
what's the line between 2 points?
Yeah,
you can get there the fastest.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. This has been really fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be back next week with another Conversations Different. Thank you for listening to Conversations Different, hosted by me, Inez Russell Gomez, editorial page editor for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our weekly episodes would not be possible without your support. We hope you enjoy them and keep listening. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Consider signing up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode, and while you're at it, consider subscribing to the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our podcast is available by visiting our website, santafenewmexican.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Conversations Different with Inez Russell Gomez is produced by Matt Dalside and Ernesto Cisneros, published by the Santa Fe New Mexican, a local and independent newspaper owned by Robin Martin.